Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks so much for being here. Happy Thursday, best day of the week. Coming up, we're going to talk to David French. He's got a new book coming out. We'll do that, I think, in the third segment of today. Breonna Taylor, we did our Facebook Live this morning. We do a Facebook Live every morning before the show. So this morning, you go to our Facebook page, search for the Mike Slater Show, and you can hear us talk about Breonna Taylor and what's next with that. We have a lot more for that planned on Monday. Tomorrow, we have our special, and we're going to go over President Trump's accomplishments over the last 4 years. And the first segment's going to be domestic accomplishments. Second, and missed opportunities too, right? This is not going to be like a hacky special where like, he's the best person in the whole world for every reason ever. So it's good things and some missed opportunities domestically, and then foreign policy, and then we'll talk about Joe Biden and what he's accomplished in the last 47 years in Washington, D.C. He's been in D.C. for 1/5 of the entire existence of the U.S. Constitution. I want to do this today, though. 2 days ago, here on the TV, we went over the background and history of Roe v. Wade. It went all the way back to Ulysses S. Grant in 1869. Yesterday on my radio show, we spent an hour going through the text of Roe v. Wade and talked about the very shaky constitutional argument that they made. It's a very scatterbrained decision, is one way to put it. So we did that on the radio show the other day. And the reason I'm spending so much time on abortion is because that's what all of this is about when it comes to the Supreme Court. It's entirely about abortion. If the Supreme Court only dealt with tort reform and interstate commerce issues, like no one would care about it. It's all about abortion. It's all about Roe v. Wade. So I think it's important that we get caught up on what's really going on here. So that's why we spent so much time. So the history of Roe v. Wade, the text of Roe v. Wade, and in light of that, I got this nice email from a listener. Very strange to hear reasoning, in quotes, from a man about Roe v. Wade. You have zero say in what women can, should, would do with their bodies for health, medical, and sanity reasons. Religious dogma from men has no place in the legal arena. I got this. I got this from a listener who usually sends me nice emails. I thought she was joking. I thought this was like a caricature of what she thought I would be receiving, but she was serious. Men have no rights to opinions about what a woman and her doctor decide is the best course of action. The hard truth is that you want Roe v. Wade overturned. You're using your religious background and your religious truths to push your agenda. Is the subject of abortion that much of a threat to you? This is not your fight. This is not the hill where you should plant your sword. Okay, so let's talk about men in the pro-life movement. First, I love the idea that men can't have an opinion on abortion, as 7 men on the Supreme Court at the time wrote Roe v. Wade. So it's not that men can't have an opinion on abortion. It's that men can only have one opinion on abortion. The pro-abortion opinion. This is very similar. It's come up a couple times. People say, oh, you can't legislate morality. They'll say that, right? Progressives will say that, usually to conservatives. You can't legislate morality. Of course you can legislate morality. It's the only way you can make legislation is based off of morality, right? You create a consensus on what is right and wrong behavior. That is morality. All legislation is based on morality. So when someone says that, what they're really saying is, you can't legislate based off your morality. I want to legislate based off my morality, which is very different. And it's the same thing here. Men can't have an opinion on this. What they really mean is men can only have my opinion on this. But anyway, that aside, this idea that this is not your fight, this is not your hill that you should plant your sword on or whatever. I have decided that this is the hill where I will plant my sword. I can think of no other hill worthy of my time and focus and energy and brain power and effort and money and prayer than this issue. It's literally life or death. And this is a hill that I encourage all men to stop being cowards on and join me and live out what I believe is maybe the one, certainly one of very few issues that you can encompass every aspect of a true, complete, if I may, godly masculinity. And that's coming up in the next segment. I want to talk about the king, warrior, magician, and lover. But let me address some of these like basic talking points. Because like I said, this email was like a caricature of the top 5 pro-choice, pro-abortion arguments here. So this point, why is this issue a threat to me? It's not it's strikingly not a threat to me. As we talked about at length a couple weeks ago, there is nothing, we talked about the sexual revolution, there's nothing that the immoral man, there's nothing the playboy loves more, there's nothing Bill Cosby loves more than the ability to sleep around with as many women as possible without consequences. In our modern immoral culture, our post-sexual revolution culture, where we're told everyone should have as much sex with everyone as possible, it's pro-life that's the threat to that man. Abortion is the tool of men who want sex without consequences. So abortion is not a threat to me. Pro-life is the threat to that pervert. You hear constantly, and you heard it in this email too, that it's my religious dogma. I have never made a religious argument for life and against abortion, ever. I've never made it on the radio. I've never made a religious argument here on the TV. I've never used the Bible as my source of authority once. And in this segment I did on the radio, this is a hate mail from my radio show, I never brought up the Bible. I never quoted scripture. Yet her whole attack is your dogma, your religion, your value. I've never talked about it. I've never quoted Psalm 104:30, Job 10:8, Ruth 4:13, Luke 1:15. I've never quoted that. I've never said that the word for baby in the Bible is brephos, the Greek word. It's the same Greek word for an unborn child, right? Elizabeth felt the baby leap inside her, John the Baptist. That word for baby, the unborn baby, is the same brephos that's used for the word baby after being born throughout the Bible. I've never made that argument. This is the very first time I've ever said that. I don't make that argument here. I make the argument of science. I make the argument that since we discovered DNA in 1950, we know that there is a particular moment when 23 fraternally derived chromosomes unite with 23 maternally derived chromosomes. They combine, and at that moment, the full, complete genetic code that expresses all of the inborn qualities of a completely new individual, just like that, at conception. Everything that will later be expressed in full adulthood, and adulthood is just another name that we give for a period of life, right? So newborn, infant, toddler, teenager, adolescent, young adult, right? These are all just embryo, fetus, right? These are all just names we give to stages of development. So everything that will be expressed in full adulthood exists at the moment of conception. It's all there. All the component building materials are there. That's not in the Bible. That's not my religion. That's not my dogma. If you ignore that scientific reality that we didn't know for a long time, for all of human history, we didn't know. If you don't accept that, you're choosing not to see the scientific breakthroughs on this issue. You're making that decision based off of your own personal reasons and politics. I read an article the other day about what different religions believe about when life begins. And I would take some time to go over them here, but I don't care. It doesn't matter. Now, I asked this one woman, we're having a back and forth, I asked this one woman, because she brought it up, being Jewish. And I asked her what her Jewish faith teaches when life begins. Now, I don't know if this is what all Jewish people believe, or I don't know, but she quoted this website like jewishlearning.com or something like that. Classical Jewish rulings concerning abortion rely primarily on the woman's instinct. Woman's instinct? What? And they respect that until the fetus emerges from the womb, it remains an integral part of the woman's body alone. So that's interesting. Why emerges from the womb as opposed to cut the umbilical cord? Because you're still connected when you cut the umbilical, or until you cut the umbilical cord.
And does that mean you can do are Jewish teaching okay with a partial birth abortion? Because technically the baby's not outside the womb when you birth the feet first and then suck its brains out of its head. So is that allowed in Jewish teaching as well? Like, that's such an absurd standard, a woman's instinct. Life doesn't begin until a woman's instinct says it does. So it could be 40 weeks, but I just don't feel like it's a baby that much. Just my instinct. Come on. I'm not appealing to any denomination here. I don't give a lick what any denomination feels about this. Roe v. Wade, in the text of it, Blackmun, the guy who wrote it, Justice Blackmun, talked about Aristotle's view of when the soul entered a baby. And he said the soul enters a boy 40 days after conception and a girl 80 to 90 days. Like, talk about arbitrary, but you okay with that, feminists? A little bit different for boys and girls. But that's just as arbitrary as this, like, oh, well, whenever the woman's instinct is. So I don't care what Aristotle says. I don't care about any of that. I talk chromosomes. I talk about how in 1978, scientists performed the first in vitro procedure. So it was the very first time, 1978, when they took an egg and a sperm and they combined it in a test tube to form a zygote. And we could, for the very first time, grow this embryo in a test tube until day 6. And at day 6, the scientists would put it back inside of the mother's womb. And then from that day, day 7 until 25, we had no idea what human development looked like. It's called the black box. We don't know what happens from day 7 to 25. So scientists started wondering, how long can we grow an embryo outside of the mother? Right? We could never do it at all, but now we can do it till day 6. How far can we go? And other scientists started saying, should we grow embryos outside of the mother at all? I don't think we should. So there was a debate going back and forth about what they should do. So medical ethicists settled on 14 days. We will try to grow an embryo outside of the womb for 14 days. Why? There's a couple of reasons, but 2 noteworthy here. First, 14 days was seen as so far away from a possibility that it was just a safe line to draw. Second, it was believed that at 14 days, the primitive streak was formed. The primitive streak. You ever heard of the primitive streak? This is when the cells line up and form what will become the spinal cord. Now, am I basing any of this off of like the Bible or Jewish teaching of, oh, it's a woman's intuition? No. This is based off of science. When the spinal cord begins to form, or when the chromosomes are conjoined to make a new human, or when the heart begins to form at day 18. Day 18, the heart begins to form. This is before most women even know they're pregnant. This is not my intuition. It's a fact. So the end of the story about the primitive streak is scientists tried to replicate what it is inside the mother's womb so they could try to grow this embryo outside of the womb, and they couldn't do it. They couldn't figure it out. There was things going on inside the womb, hormones and whatever, that they could not replicate outside the womb. And then they finally did it. They got to day 7. They could grow an embryo to day 7. And they couldn't get to day 8. So they tried, and they finally got to day 8. And then years went by and they could get to year 9. And then they got to day 11. And they got to day 12. And then they got to day 13. And then they got to day 14 and they stopped. Because they were right. Day 14 is when the spinal cord begins to form. And there's not a scientist in the world who has gone past day 14 because they know it's life. And you'd think these scientists would be immune to this, right? I mean, they're working with tiny cells all day and like in test tubes and refrigeration units and stuff. You'd think they'd be immune to what they're dealing with exactly, but they're not. It's too much life for them that they don't go any further than day 14. And we're having these ridiculous debates about first trimester, second trimester, all this ridiculous. Come on, scientists themselves stop at 14 days. Come on, man. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So I used to feel bad or feel the need to apologize for talking about abortion on the radio or the TV. I don't.
anymore. And in fact, I'm taking this opportunity to do it because that's what this whole Supreme Court thing is all about. I saw a video yesterday of Kamala Harris asking Brett Kavanaugh. It was something like, do you know of any laws that force a man to do something with his body? Or whatever. Kavanaugh's like, what are you talking about? But that's what this is all, that's what this all is. It's all about abortion. So let's take one more moment here to get freshened up on it. I love this woman's email she wrote me yesterday. She's in capital letters. She said, this is not your fight. This is not the hill where you should plant your sword. So let me give you the very short of this. This is like a whole long thing, but I'll give you the short of it. Psychologist Carl Jung, J-U-N-G, 100 years ago, he came up with this outline, and I like it very much. The king, warrior, magician, and lover. There's a book called that. It's very short, and you should definitely read it. So these are the four aspects of masculinity, right? The four archetypes of masculinity. And the goal should be to become each of these as a man. Because that's our point, right? Like, you're a man, you have no say in this. Right? King, warrior, magician, lover. The king brings order to chaos. The warrior defends the weak and vulnerable. The magician has wisdom and this is my favorite part about the magician, not only has wisdom, but can pierce through the lies. The magician sees evil for what and where it is and when it masquerades as goodness. And the lover loves all things beautiful. The lover has a deep empathy and compassion. So these are the four aspects of true masculinity. So the first order of business is, do you want to be these things? That's right. You gotta say yes there. Like, if not, then fine. Like, just go along with the cultural torrent, which in this case, I mean, has tons of issues, right? But in this case results in the death of 650,000 babies a year. Just put that in perspective, right? Everyone's freaking out about 200,000 COVID deaths, and every year there's 650,000 abortions. So if you want to be these things, that's great. Let's go through them. So you want to be a king. Think of the woman who has no real man in her life. A friend of mine got pregnant at a young age, and her dad told her to get an abortion. Her boyfriend wanted the baby, but society told him that he has no say, just like this woman told me. This woman needed a king in her life, someone to bring order to the chaos. And fortunately, she had one. And now she's an amazing mom. There are lots of women out there, men, who need a king in their life, someone to bring order to this chaos. Abby Johnson, remember we talked to her last week, I think. And I've heard this from many different people who work at pro-life centers. Oh, I should have said this, I'm sorry. My goal here is to encourage you men to join me on this hill, and specifically to go volunteer at a pro-life pregnancy center. Pro-life pregnancy centers are the opposite of Planned Parenthoods. So these are where women go when they're in a crisis pregnancy, and they don't know what to do. And these centers help them through the process and through the pregnancy and then through their lives as well. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And every city has a bunch of them, and you should definitely support them. And they need men. Oh man, if you are a guy and you want to help out, they will shower you with love. So Abby Johnson told the story of, she used to run it. I don't know if it was the biggest Planned Parenthood, but one of the biggest ones in Texas. So she's seen this many times where there's a couple comes in, and the woman is scared, doesn't know what to do, and in the chaos, and she's looking at her boyfriend, and she is silently begging him to stand up for her and her baby. And he's been castrated and told that he can't have an opinion on the life of this baby. And he doesn't say anything, and she's crushed because she wants more than anything for the man in her life to fight for her. And that's what the king can do, which leads to the warrior. I mean, that one's simple. An abortionist ends life, and you can be a part of saving them. Pretty amazing. Fighting for the most vulnerable person in the world. Do you want to be a magician? Again, the magician has wisdom and not only speaks truth, but can see through the lies, see through the evil in disguise. There are, in Cleveland, these pro-abortion billboards that Planned Parenthood put up. And it says, abortion is, there's an underline, and then different billboards have different adjectives, right? So some of these billboards, it'll say, abortion is liberty. Abortion is a blessing. Abortion is a family value. Abortion is a blessing. Abortion is sacred. How about this one? Abortion is life-saving. Every one of these is an absolute lie. You can see that, right? It's pretty amazing. Abortion is life-saving. You see that that's a lie. Most people can't. So are you equipped with that wisdom? Like, did you just have a reaction to that? Like, whoa, abortion's life-saving? If you had a reaction to that, you're one of few people who have the wisdom to see through the lies. You are needed. You are needed. There's a lot of lies out there. And then the lover, right? Lover has a deep empathy and compassion for others and can see the beauty in everything. And a lover feels the highs and lows of life very deeply. And men, if you work with women through this process, when you help at these pro-life centers, you feel the deep pain and confusion of the situation, and you feel the rush of joy coming into the world. And like you get the highs and lows of that like you could never imagine. And that's a beautiful thing to experience. Now, nothing in life worth having, there's no shortcut to anything in life worth having. It's not supposed to be that way. But I'll tell you the surest, not the shortest, but the surest way to live all four of these masculine characteristics, which our society desperately needs, is to join the pro-life movement. And you can be the king, the warrior, the magician, and the lover. Because the pro-life movement needs powerful, confident, strong, masculine men. Especially when society is telling you, and has told you for the longest time, to shut up. Sit down, shut up, you don't have a say. I'll end with this quote from C.S. Lewis. This is from Screwtape Letters, so it's written from the perspective of the devil. Guys, do you have the text up? Because I think I got to change the tense here. Let me change the tense, but this is how it's written in the book. What you're reading is how it's written. I'm going to switch it around. The more often you feel without acting. Think about this. The more often you feel without acting, the less you will be able ever to act. And in the long run, the less you will even be able to feel. Society has told men for decades now to not act. You have no say. So men didn't act, and then we stopped feeling. So my suggestion is that we start to feel again, men, and then get up and act. And be a king, a warrior, a magician, and a lover. Please Google Pro-Life Center in the town you live in and save lives. True story. Mike Slater. David French coming up next. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, excited for our next guest. I've been reading his writing for a long time, and I hope you do as well. He is now a senior editor at The Dispatch and a columnist at Time Magazine. He's got a new book, Divided We Fall, America's Secession Threat, and How to Restore Our Nation. Mr. David French. How are you, David?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
Really good to talk to you. My pleasure. So, all right, we got a lot of big things to talk about. Every time I think our nation is going to go to a civil war and we're going to break apart and this is it, I'm always like, all right, hold on. Things have been really bad before. And I feel like we have like a chronocentrism bias where like the things that are happening now are the worst ever. And I don't know. So like that being said, do you know where I'm going? Like what's your perspective on like, are things now really worse? Or like what was the vibe of the country like in 1860? Compared to today? Are we a bunch of whiners, or is this really like worse than ever?
No, well, I'm not saying it's worse than ever. I'm saying it's heading in a bad direction. And it's heading in a direction, there are things that are similar to 1776 and things that are similar to 1860. And there are ways that we can measure that things are getting worse, that they are heading in a bad direction. And so let's look at it this way. We know for a long time that America has been sorting into geographically, ideologically homogenous geographic centers. That's getting more dramatic. We know that Americans are getting more extreme in their political views. We know that's getting more dramatic. We can measure all of these things. We know that Americans are disliking each other more across the partisan aisle, and we know that's getting more dramatic. So we have all of these things that are measurable and real: geographic sorting, increasing extremism, increasing partisan animosity, and they're getting to be to such an extent. For example, the geographic sorting is so profound that now about 80% of Americans live in states that are single-party rule. There is a Republican Democrat, Republican governor, Republican governor, Republican upper house, Republican lower house of the state legislature, or a Democratic governor, Democratic upper house, Democratic lower house. And there's only actually one legislature in the United States that's still split, and that's in Minnesota. And so we've got all of these things that are very real phenomenon that sort of also buttress what we feel and see on Twitter or on the news as escalating political animosity.
Yeah. So I'm totally with you on all this. Compared to what? How far back are you looking as you compare how things are getting worse?
I really am going back all the way to the beginning of the American nation, and also going back to, you mentioned 1860. What do we have in common now? What are things that we have in common now with then? And we actually have a surprising number of things in common. One of the ingredients for secession, I say, are not just partisan division. We've always had partisan division, and we've always had a degree of animosity. But when it starts to cluster into geographic regions, and when those geographic regions sort of personify a distinct culture that they believe is under threat from the other parts of the country, then you're beginning to you start to get a little nervous. Now, we're not in the situation of 1776 or 1860, where, in 1776 for good reasons, for 1860 for bad reasons, there was a secessionary impulse. But in both 1776 and 1860, the ingredient that really set it off was that, yes, you had the geographic enclaves. Yes, you had the sense that you had a culture and a political culture that was under real threat, but there was also a sense of real danger that the other side was dangerous. And when I was writing the book, I said, we're not there yet. We're not there like in 1860 when the Southern newspapers were screaming that the North wanted Southerners dead, essentially. We're not there yet. But then since I wrote the book, we've started to have escalating political violence in this country that is now supplementing and enhancing and amplifying all of this angst and animosity in the United States. So we're not there yet, but what I'm saying is we can't, if we go there, we may pass the point of no return.
Totally. What are these cultural differences? I'm so fascinated by this. I know I read an article you wrote the other day about, you used to live in the South and now do you live in New York?
No, I used to live in New York. I grew up in the South. I've lived in New York. I've lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Ithaca, New York, and Manhattan, Center City, Philly. So I've been all over the Northeast.
Yeah, and I know you made the half joke that people up north, like, you mentioned the name Nick Saban. And people don't know who that is, and it's like, what? Like he's either a god or the devil if you live in this. You don't even know him. So I know that's like a half jest, although revealing. But what are these big cultural differences that you see in our country that maybe are like incompatible? Or is that the right word? Or like just totally at odds with each other?
Well, profound. They're profound cultural differences. So, I've talked mainly so far in our conversation about political differences, but cultural differences, for example, political differences flow from these cultural differences. So, for example, America is an increasingly secularizing country, but it's not increasingly secular everywhere. Manhattan or San Francisco, the coasts are the Northeast and the West Coast are far more secular than where I live in the South. So you have a profound religious difference. You have profound differences in even things as simple as the sports you watch. College football is a very rural and suburban, enterprise. It's a rural and suburban fan base, and whereas NBA basketball is a more urban and blue, more of a fan base, and college football is more of a red fan base, and then sort of the last universal fan base is the NFL, and it's extremely politically contentious right now. I mean, that's where the kneeling controversy started. So I even go through their viewing maps that the New York Times published in 2016, ratings maps, that show that a ton of shows, of popular television shows, kind of track the Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump county voting map, where there are shows that are popular in blue America that are not at all in red, and shows that are popular in red and not at all in blue. And that was the Nick Saban example, is sort of, it's the Darth Vader of the American college football scene is like completely unknown quantity in parts of this country.
Yeah, is that just like a interesting kind of funny fluke about our multicultural society, or do you find that to be like an existential problem?
No, it's not. It's if you take each one of these things in isolation, they're a quirk, a curiosity. They're interesting. You put them all together, and you start to see, oh, okay, we are starting to lack a common culture. Nations, and to some extent, nations need common cultures. And what you start to see when you put everything together, from who watches The Walking Dead to who goes to church to what TV shows do you watch to where do you get your news to what is your worldview at a fundamental level, and you realize that we don't understand each other, and often don't like each other at all, and don't live around each other, and feel that the other person is becoming an actual threat. So it's all of these things build together. And that's one of the things the book does, is it tries to take a lot of this work that's been done. People have said, oh, look, we're divided on culture. Oh, look, we're divided on religion. Oh, look, we're divided on politics. And I'm saying, whoa, we're divided on everything. That there is not a single important political, cultural, social, religious trend that's pulling Americans together more than it's pushing us apart.
That's a huge claim, and I want to get to the solutions here in a minute. That's a huge claim, and I've been thinking it for a long time. Can we think of any cultural force that unites Americans? Or is there any cultural institution or brand or even holiday these days, right? Like, I would think like Thanksgiving's always been kind of a thing that we can all unite behind because it's not really religious, although it used to be a religious holiday. But now even that's like, oh, well, it's Indigenous Peoples Day. So like that's not even a thing that we can, so like I can't think of anything, and I hate to be all negative about that, but is there any force that's uniting us?
Well, we have a lot of existing ties, like a lot of things, just inertia unites us a lot.
Yeah, that's not good enough.
So that's the whole point of the book, is we can't take this union for granted. It's that all of these things are pulling. We've got a whole lot that's pulling us apart, and it's straining those ties. And we need forces that are trying to push us back together again. But when you talk about atomizing entertainment, when you talk about dividing religious culture, you talk about increased political animosity, when you talk about increased sorting geographically, all of these things are big things that are occurring that are pulling and pulling and pulling rather than knitting us together. And we're even lacking now sort of this common sense of the American narrative story. Is America's story a good story or a bad story? You have one side that focuses on America's a good story, and you have another side that says America's a bad story, rather than combining the two.
That's tough.
It's very tough.
So, all right, so so I'm totally with you. I'm like, yeah, we need to unite and all this. And then I'm like, well, hold on. Like Cardi B's song WAP, okay? It's like the number one song, right? This isn't just some weird like little, and they're like, I'll never unite with that, right? So like, what do I do when you have like, that seems like a insurmountable cultural shift, which is my pivot towards what do we do about this problem?
The answer is not that we're all going to start to agree. I mean, that's just not the answer. A lot of people sort of say, look, I mean, my political opponents are divisive, when they really mean they disagree with me. And so what we have to realize is America is getting increasingly diverse. It is increasingly diverse on every spectrum: religious, racial, ethnic, ideological. And so what we have to do is we have to say, how do we have a home for everybody? How do we have a home for everybody in this land? And actually, James Madison in Federalist 10, which should be everybody's favorite Federalist paper, outlines a model for this. And he says that you deal with the threat of violent faction, with this sort of threat of divisive force, by allowing many factions to bloom. In other words, pluralism, allowing many different voices to be heard, allowing many different communities to flourish. And what that means, it means give up the goal of domination and have a goal of accommodation. And that's both an outlook, where you give up sort of like owning the libs or destroying the conservatives, and you say, how can we create a political culture where, for example, California can be California and Tennessee can be Tennessee, where these different communities can flourish. And I outline a path forward through the Bill of Rights, through federalism, and through a necessary attitudinal change in the American people, away from, I'm not saying kumbaya, everybody love each other, but understanding what true tolerance is, which means in living together through differences that are offensive to us, that are, that song WAP is offensive in so many ways. But that doesn't mean I'm going to swat away Cardi B's First Amendment rights. It means I will respond to Cardi B with Cardi B's bad speech with what I hope is better speech.
Yeah. We got about a minute. There has to be a uniting strand, however, through all of these different pluralistic entities. No?
Yeah.
There has to be something that unites. So what would you argue maybe is one thing that unites?
Well, I would say the fundamental aspect of the American Social Compact is the Bill of Rights. So the aspirational language of 1776, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that our creators endowed us with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, is like the mission statement of America.
Yeah.
And the Bill of Rights is like the bylaws that enacts the mission statement. That if there's a fundamental distillation of what is what are the aspirations of the United States of America, it really does distill to the Bill of Rights, and I should add the Civil War amendments that made the Bill of Rights applicable all across the country and to all Americans. And that's the fundamental social compact right there. It is this culture and this nation and this society that was created to preserve human liberty and to protect human flourishing by preserving human liberty. And then how we exercise that liberty is our responsibility, and we should exercise it towards virtuous ends. Not everybody does, but how we exercise it is our responsibility, and how we govern ourselves under that liberty is our responsibility. And I think if you get down to the fundamental American Social Compact, it's these indispensable freedoms, these indispensable human rights that are articulated in our Constitution as a baseline minimum of who we are. We are the people that preserve these freedoms. And then we are the people that allow flourishing community under the umbrella of these protections.
Yeah. All right. I got two things to read. Divided We Fall, America's Secession Threat, and How to Restore Our Nation by David French. And Federalist Paper number 10 by...
Exactly.
Who wrote 10? Who wrote 10?
James Madison.
We're going to read Madison's Federalist 10, okay? And
Yes.
It doesn't matter what order. Just do them both. David French, I appreciate you, sir. Thank you for your time. Thanks for this book.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Coming next, got an example of how it seems like we're living on two different planets. We'll do that next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, we are in a battle for reality. That's the era we live in right now. The misinformation's everywhere. It's nonstop. You're bombarded with it. And we could spend the whole show every day and That's where we're headed. It's going to be like nothing you've never seen before, anything you've ever seen before coming up here with the election, but just misinformation, just straight up, flat out misinformation. This is Pete Buttigieg. Remember him the other day? He said, we're in danger of a majority of justices on the Supreme Court being chosen by presidents who didn't even get the majority of the popular vote. Any way you look at it, we're getting less democratic by the day. So first of all, we don't live in a democracy, but he's also wrong. George W. Bush nominated Alito and Roberts, and they were nominated after the 2004 election, where W did get a majority of the popular vote. There's 5 conservatives on the court right now, soon to be a 6th. So the claim is that none of them were appointed by a Republican who won the popular vote. So H.W. Bush nominated Clarence Thomas after winning the popular vote. Both of W's nominees were after he won the popular vote, which isn't even a thing, by the way, the popular vote, so don't be distracted by that. And then, of course, you have Trump's 2 and then soon to be a 3rd. But that claim is factually wrong. And it takes 2 seconds to look up. Like, this isn't now, not only that, not only were the Republicans on the court nominated by someone who won the popular vote, which isn't a thing, but RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, was appointed by Bill Clinton after his 92 election, where he only got 43% of the vote. So he didn't even get a majority of the vote. I don't want to go into a whole thing about democracy. We're going to do a whole thing, hopefully next week, about the Electoral College. We don't live in a democracy. We don't live in a country with majority rule by design and for good reason. And we talked to David Harsanyi about it, I think last Thursday, who wrote a book about democracy. And he had this great line about how people who say they like democracy don't like it as much as they think they do. Anyway, I don't want to get off track. The point here is about misinformation. How can Buttigieg and all these other people, and we don't have to quote all of it, be so wrong about something that's so easy to look up? And obviously, the facts undercut the entire argument they're making. Let me give you another example with the California wildfires and wildfires across the country. We hear all the time that these are the worst wildfires ever. Have you heard this claim? 8,000 wildfires, 3.4 million acres, 25 deaths, 5,400 structures destroyed. Those are all dramatic figures and all terrible. The Atlantic says this year is already the most destructive wildfire season. The Week said, living through the apocalypse. The Atlantic again, the U.S. is on the path of destruction. Climate change is killing Americans. CNBC said, even though the U.S. is only halfway through the wildfire season, this year is one of the worst in history. So we're going to ignore the fact that this is mostly caused by poor forest management, which is a fact agreed upon by Gavin Newsom. He acknowledged it to Trump the other day. But these claims aren't true at all. If any of these articles include any data and history and charts, the charts start in 1990. There was history prior to 1990. Like, what a ridiculous, it's the worst wildfires ever in the last 30 years. And hope no one notices. Nationwide, we're not even on path to exceed the number of acres burned in 2017. So the ridiculousness of these statements that this is the worst wildfire season in history, you just gotta go back 3 years ago was worse. But even 3 years ago, because someone can make the argument, well, 2017 was like really, really, really bad, so we're not gonna, no, it wasn't. Not comparatively. Check out this graph. This chart goes back to 1930, 1926 specifically. On the left and on the right is 2017. This is the U.S. forest area burned in acres. 2017 burned 1/5 of the acreage in the 30s. That's according to the National Interagency Fire Center. Okay? So you look, can you guys throw it up again one more time? So it starts 1926. So you look 1926 to about 1954-ish or so. That's when the numbers are really high. The wildfires today are a fraction. A fraction. Probably because our ability to fight them are better, right? Back in 1926, it was about wildfire. Like, what are you going to do, right? You don't have like DC-10 airplanes with dropping 80,000 gallons of fire repellent, right? So we had things were bad then, but then we had a really good run from like 54 to 2002. And I wonder how much of that downtick was because of better forest management. And then again, how much of the uptick from about 2002 was because of bad forest management. But my point of this is everyone's lying to you all the time. Specifically with the fires, don't think that any of this is anything new. And that chart only goes back to 1926. We don't have charts going back to like 1600, which may paint a completely even different picture. But it's the same thing. Pandemics are nothing new. Riots are nothing new. Wildfires are nothing new. Everyone's acting like these are all new phenomenons. They've been around forever. So I hope you see the connection between these two stories. They're complete lies. Stated as entirely objective fact. And it's crazy. We're just living on different planets, man. We're living on different, and it's not even like, we're so far off. And these different planets that we're living on, they're getting even further apart. To David French's point. Let me wrap with this real quick. I read this article from Molalla, Oregon. This is awesome. Wait 1 second before you guys throw up this picture. Nicole West, I want you to visualize this. Nicole West steered her bulldozer through the smoldering forest, pushing logs into the underbrush and away from the wildfires ripping through Oregon's Cascade Mountains. And she had her border collie next to her riding shotgun. All right, so picture Nicole West riding a bulldozer in a forest fire, doing it herself, okay? Now throw up the picture of Nicole West. Is she not exactly how you picture her? Two young men, like that is a tough chick right there. Two young men pulled a water tank behind their pickup truck, struggling to douse the flames. These men and women are of the Hillbilly Brigade, 1,200 of them in all. So apparently in this town, there's 9,000 residents that were evacuated. The very small firefighters are deployed downtown to prevent any structures from being burned. State and federal firefighters are off elsewhere. So these 1,200 people of the Hillbilly Brigade, notice the two Trump signs, are out there fighting the fires themselves. This is the local police chief. He said these people are amazing. The Hillbilly Brigade improvised and turned their pickups into fire engines on the fly. They put stock tanks in the beds of their trucks and used pumps to put out hot spots. These are regular guys in the area. They're not trained. They're lumberjacks and dairy farmers, friends and neighbors cobbling together rudimentary equipment. Isn't that amazing? It reminds me of the Cajun. So you got the Hillbilly Brigade, the Cajun Navy. Remember the Cajun Navy whenever there's a hurricane in like Louisiana? These are just regular people who hop on whatever boat they have to go rescue other people. And it reminds me of the 9/11 boat lift that we shared recently too. If we can be more like the Hillbilly Brigade, if each of us could be more like the Hillbilly Brigade, you know we'd be better off. And again, I point to the Trump flags in the background. And just to bring it back to David French, I would argue that this is who we really are. True story. Mike Slater. Got our special tomorrow. Spread the word.